If you find yourself waking up between 3 AM and 5 AM, it is not your alarm clock. It is your soul knocking. Your body may still be tired, but your awareness is wide awake, asking for your attention. Most people try to go back to sleep, but the wise ones sit still and listen. Pause for a moment. How many of us spend our days rushing, answering messages, fulfilling obligations, yet never pausing to ask, what is it that my inner self is really trying to tell me? This early hour between darkness and dawn is not a problem to fix. It is a doorway. In the ancient monasteries of the East, the monks rise at this very time, not to do more, but to be more, to merge the silence of the body with the clarity of the mind, to listen, to breathe, to remember who they are, before the world demands that they become something else. If you are waking up during these hours, there are no accidents. There is only awareness that hasn't yet been honored. There is something profoundly mysterious about the hours between 3 AM and 5 AM. Long before the first hint of dawn brushes the sky, something stirs, not in the world outside, but within you. Many people wake during these hours, startled, restless, or unable to return to sleep. And while it's easy to dismiss these awakenings as mere interruptions or biological quirks, those who live with deeper awareness begin to notice a pattern, a rhythm, a subtle invitation. What if waking between these hours isn't a disturbance, but a message? Not an inconvenience, but a quiet knock from a wiser part of you, seeking your attention. In ancient traditions across cultures, from East Asian medicine to indigenous spiritual systems, this window of time is considered sacred, not because of superstition, but because of what is naturally happening within the body, the mind, and the soul. Physiologically, the body is in a deep parasympathetic state. The mind is shifting between theta and delta waves. Subconscious material, long buried, begins to rise, and emotionally, this is the time when grief, unresolved longing, spiritual thirst, and deep intuitive signals often surface. In traditional Chinese medicine, this period is connected to the lungs, which are seen as the organs of grief and release. The lungs are not only responsible for breathing in oxygen, they are symbolically and energetically responsible for helping you let go. Let go of what's no longer serving you. Let go of past pain. Let go of identities that have become too tight, too limiting. When people wake up during this window, they are often being invited to release something. But the problem is, most never pause long enough to listen. Consider this. Have you ever had a dream that stirred something in you, a memory, a worry, or a person you once knew? And then you awoke, heart pounding, eyes wide open at precisely 3:47 AM. You looked around, checked your phone, maybe tried to go back to sleep. But what if, instead of escaping it, you leaned in and asked, why now? There is a woman who once shared a story of waking up for 11 nights straight at 4:11 AM. She was going through a quiet divorce, not one filled with fighting, but with silence. Her husband had grown more distant. The love had faded like old wallpaper, still there, but colorless. Each morning she woke, her chest felt tight, not from anxiety, but from the weight of words she never spoke. The grief of knowing the love was gone, but still pretending it was there. On the 12th morning, instead of tossing and turning, she sat up, lit a candle, breathed. She didn't try to meditate or solve anything. She just sat with the sensation in her lungs, her body trying to tell her something. Within a few minutes, tears began to fall. The first tears she had allowed herself in months. She wept not because she was weak, but because she finally made space for the truth to move through her. She later said that moment at 4:11 AM was when her healing truly began. Sometimes, emotional intelligence doesn't arrive through thinking. It arises when we slow down enough to feel, to breathe, to let go. Waking at these hours can often be a sign of unresolved emotional material surfacing, especially grief, guilt, shame, or a deep longing for authenticity. For people who live disconnected from their emotional truth during the day, the night becomes a whispering teacher. It's no coincidence that this is also the hour many people experience panic attacks, sudden clarity, or even spiritual awakenings. The body may rest, but the soul is fully awake, and this affects more than just the individual. Emotional residue doesn't stay in isolation. It leaks into how we speak to others, how we show up in relationships, how we react when we feel ignored or misunderstood. If you haven't processed your grief, your sadness, your unresolved truths, they show up, often unintentionally, as distance, defensiveness, or control. This is why these early morning hours matter, because how you relate to yourself in the dark is how you will relate to others in the light. There's an old saying, the morning shows the day, but few realize that the early morning, before the sunrise, is what determines the spirit of your day. If you meet yourself with stillness, with presence, and with honesty during this window, your emotional energy begins to stabilize, and people around you will feel it. Your children, your partner, your friends. The way you listen changes. The way you speak softens, and the way you hold boundaries becomes rooted not in fear, but in love. Waking between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. is not a problem to solve. It is an inner alarm asking, what am I not addressing during the day? What truth, if I allowed it space, would set me free? What conversation am I afraid to have? Not with another, but with myself. Now, from a psychological perspective, this time frame aligns with patterns of hyperarousal in the nervous system. Stress hormones, especially cortisol, tend to spike in the early morning. If you've been carrying unresolved stress, relational conflict, financial pressure, inner doubt, your nervous system may activate to alert you. But this is not to punish you. It's to give you the opportunity to meet your stress with conscious awareness, to intervene not with fear, but with stillness. And when you begin to approach these hours with reverence, not resistance, your relationship with time changes. It becomes less about how many hours of sleep you got and more about how deeply you connected to your inner self in the time you were awake. One man, a business owner in his 50s, began waking at 3:33 a.m. every morning after losing his mother. He didn't cry when she passed. He told everyone he was fine, said all the right things at the funeral. But weeks later, 3:33 a.m. would find him wide awake. No reason, no dream. Just an ache in the chest and a pressure behind his eyes. He resisted it. Took melatonin. Played sleep meditations. Nothing helped. Then one morning, he did something different. He went to his late mother's kitchen, opened her recipe box, and cooked her favorite breakfast dish. Eggs with dill and onions, just like she used to make. He sat there in the quiet, plate in front of him, and cried for the first time since her passing. The next night, he slept like a child. Sometimes grief doesn't want you to move on. It just wants to be acknowledged, honored, fed with presence, and it will wake you up until you do. This window of 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. is also when intuitive insights emerge. The clutter of the conscious mind is minimal. The subconscious speaks clearly. You may remember people from your past. You may suddenly feel clarity about a decision you've been postponing. Or you may sense that someone you love is thinking of you, even from far away. These are not hallucinations. They are signals. And the more emotionally attuned you become, the more you begin to trust this inner knowing. One woman, after waking at 4:20 a.m. for 3 consecutive weeks, remembered a friend she hadn't spoken to in over 20 years. She had no idea why this memory kept returning. Eventually, she reached out, only to find out her friend was in a hospital recovering from surgery and had been thinking about her every day. Their reconnection became a healing moment for both. When you ignore these awakenings, you silence the deeper intelligence that lives within you. But when you welcome them, even with quiet curiosity, you begin to open doors that lead to healing, reconnection, and transformation. Not only for yourself, but for the people around you. What often blocks us from hearing these messages is the expectation that healing should feel comfortable. But healing often begins in discomfort, in interrupted sleep, in heavy breath, in sudden tears, in the quiet pain of remembering something we've tried to forget. But what if these moments were not obstacles, but openings? Learning to sit in silence between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. is not about becoming more productive. It's about becoming more present. Not for the sake of achievement, but for the sake of alignment. When you wake during these hours, your task is not to fight sleep, but to gently turn inward. Not to analyze, but to observe. Not to suppress, but to allow. Many spiritual traditions view this time as the moment when the veil between the physical and the unseen is thinnest. But even if you are not spiritual, consider the practical value. These are the only hours when the world does not demand anything of you. No emails, no conversations, no tasks, only you and the quiet voice within. What would happen if you began to treat this time not as an accident, but as an appointment? If you're in a relationship, the way you meet yourself in the early morning directly impacts how you meet your partner later. If you wake in a state of tension and react with resistance, you carry that unresolved emotion into every interaction. But if you choose to meet your 3 a.m. awakenings with softness, you begin to train your emotional muscles. You create a space within you that is capable of receiving emotion without panic. And that very skill, the ability to hold emotion, is the root of all deep, loving relationships. A man who can sit with his own grief at 4 a.m. will not run from the tears of his partner at 4 p.m. A woman who can breathe through her fears before dawn will not lash out in control or insecurity when her partner seems distant. The inner work done in the dark becomes the emotional maturity expressed in the light. And so the question is not, why am I waking up? But what is waking up within me? That is where transformation begins. In the pause, in the breath, in the stillness between yesterday and tomorrow. And the more you listen, the more your body begins to trust you. Your emotions begin to soften. Your mind begins to settle. And your heart begins to speak, not in noise, but in clarity. This hour does not belong to fear or to anxiety or to exhaustion. It belongs to the quiet power of presence. And it's calling you. If you wake between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., the natural tendency is to assume that something has gone wrong. Perhaps your sleep cycle is broken. Maybe you're anxious. Or maybe your mind is overactive, your body restless. This interpretation, though common, is narrow. It assumes that these awakenings are symptoms of dysfunction, something to be fixed, silenced, or avoided. But in reality, what often appears as disruption is actually communication, a message from the deepest parts of your inner system, from your nervous system, from the self you usually silence during the day. The nervous system, after all, is not just about stress and relaxation. It is the highway of emotional signals, the bridge between mind and body. And when you're awake in those early hours, it's not just because of external noises or random dreams. More often than not, it's because your nervous system is trying to speak to you, not through words, but through sensation. This time window, between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., often aligns with increased cortisol secretion. Cortisol is commonly referred to as the stress hormone, but it's far more complex. Cortisol is also a signal of anticipation. It tells your body to prepare, but prepare for what? In healthy cycles, it prepares you for the day, waking, movement, interaction. In dysregulated cycles, it may also prepare you for battle, subtle emotional battles that you haven't resolved, a conversation you've been avoiding, a decision you haven't made, or emotions you've been pushing down for years. When you wake up during these hours, your nervous system is not attacking you. It's alerting you. It's saying something in your emotional world is asking for space. You may not know exactly what it is, but if you resist the awakening with frustration, you miss the opportunity to listen. The body speaks in whispers first, and when the whispers are ignored, they become symptoms. There's a young woman who worked in a high-pressure environment, leading a corporate team, managing clients, putting out fires every day. She believed she was fine. Her days were productive. Her evenings filled with responsibilities. But she began waking up at exactly 3 a.m. every night. Her chest would tighten. Her thoughts would race. Not about anything specific, but about everything. Instead of resisting, she chose to sit with a hand on her heart and simply breathe. No techniques, no goals, just breath and presence. Within weeks, she began to realize what her body was showing her. She was lonely, not in a dramatic way, not in the absence of people, but in the absence of real connection. She had spent so long being the strong one, the capable one, that no one thought she needed emotional support. But her body did. Her nervous system was carrying the weight of years of silent endurance. And in those early morning hours, when no one else was asking anything of her, her body finally had the chance to speak. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do at 4 a.m. is not go back to sleep. It's to wake up, not just physically, but emotionally. To realize that the anxiety you feel isn't just mental, it's relational. It's the consequence of not being seen, not being held, or not expressing yourself in ways that your nervous system needs to regulate. And this shows up everywhere, in your mood, in your posture, in the tone of your voice when you speak to those closest to you. The nervous system is not separate from your relationships. It is the foundation. If your system is in constant hyperarousal, even small irritations from your partner will feel like threats. You'll misinterpret a sigh as judgment. You'll hear silence as abandonment. You'll take space as rejection. Not because your partner has changed, but because your inner world is on edge. Conversely, when your nervous system feels safe, regulated, heard, grounded, your perception of others softens. You're less reactive, more curious, less defensive, more open. That's why these early hours matter. It's a chance to reset the tone of your internal world. Not through effort, but through attention. And the most potent tool for this is not complicated. It's breath. Breath is the original medicine. It's the only function in the body that is both voluntary and involuntary. You breathe automatically, but you can also control it. That means your breath is the direct bridge between your conscious and unconscious states. When you wake up between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., you have a unique opportunity to use breath not just to calm yourself, but to repattern your entire emotional energy for the day ahead. Try this. Instead of getting frustrated, place one hand on your abdomen and one on your chest. Inhale slowly through the nose for 4 counts. Pause for 1 count. Exhale through the mouth for 6 counts. Repeat, but don't rush. Don't try. Just observe. This simple act begins to shift your body from sympathetic see, fight or flight to parasympathetic see, rest and digest. It tells your body you're safe, you're home, you're listening. And when your body feels heard, it softens. When it softens, your thoughts become clearer. And when your thoughts are clearer, your emotions become more honest. From this state, you can begin to access what the Shaolin tradition calls a silent cultivation. This is the heart of the next principle. It is the practice of being, not doing, of sitting in stillness, not chasing solutions, of letting the morning speak to you, rather than you speaking to it. In most of modern life, stillness is treated like a luxury, something you earn after work, something you might get during a weekend retreat. But in truth, stillness is not a luxury. It is a requirement for emotional maturity, especially in relationships. Because without stillness, we only repeat emotional patterns. We react instead of responding. We project instead of pausing. And we confuse our past pain with present moments. The early morning hours are fertile ground for stillness because there is no noise. The world is asleep. The demands are quiet. Your ego is tired, and your true self, the one that is rarely heard, can finally rise. One man, after the death of his brother, found himself waking at 3:50 a.m. every morning. He tried journaling. He tried praying. Nothing brought peace until he began a new practice, simply lighting a single candle and sitting in front of it. No phone, no music, just breath, presence, and the flicker of light. Over time, he began to notice a shift. His anger, which had been sharp and loud, began to dissolve, not because he pushed it away, but because he gave it space. The silence held him. It reminded him that pain does not need to be fixed. It needs to be honored. This is what silent cultivation offers, a container for your emotional energy to transform. When you create space without agenda, your emotions begin to organize themselves. The grief speaks softly. The fear shrinks in the presence of attention. The longing becomes a guide, not a tormentor. And in practical life, this changes everything. A woman who practices stillness each morning becomes less controlling in her relationship. She no longer tries to manage every outcome because she trusts her internal world. A man who breathes deeply at 3 a.m. becomes less reactive in conversation. He doesn't need to win arguments. He's already anchored. Parents who wake early and meet themselves in silence become more patient with their children. Not because they read a book on parenting, but because they have mastered themselves first. Stillness builds inner structure, and inner structure is what allows for external grace. You cannot pour emotional stability into your relationships if your own container is cracked. In a world that worships busyness, choosing silence is a radical act, but it is in that silence where wisdom emerges. You begin to understand not just what you feel, but why you feel. You see the roots of your behaviors. You remember old wounds. You catch yourself before you fall into familiar traps. And perhaps most importantly, you learn to be with yourself in the way you wish others could be with you. That is the quiet miracle of these early hours. They teach you to become the companion you've been seeking, not as a replacement for love from others, but as the foundation for love that can be received. Because if you are constantly afraid, if you are constantly avoiding your own inner world, even the most sincere love from others will be misinterpreted, deflected, or distrusted. But when you meet yourself, truly meet yourself, in the stillness between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., you begin to trust again. Trust your body, trust your feelings, trust your instincts, and trust the relationships that are grounded, not in drama, but in shared presence. There is no need to chase insight. Just sit, just breathe, just allow. Silent cultivation is not about achieving something. It is about remembering something. Remembering that you are not your anxiety. You are not your trauma. You are not your past. You are the awareness that sees all of it. The presence that remains even when everything else changes. And when you carry that presence into the rest of your day, everything changes. You speak differently. You listen more fully. You forgive more easily. You say no more clearly. Not because you've become someone else, but because you've finally returned to who you are. In the still hours of the early morning, the world offers you a secret gift, the chance to come home to yourself, not with noise, not with effort, but with breath and listening. There is a deep wisdom held in the body, one that most people never learn to access. in the early morning hours, when the world is still asleep and the distractions are silent, that wisdom rises to the surface. But unlike the loud voice of thought, the body speaks through sensation, through stillness, through quiet gestures that often go ignored. To awaken during this time is not only a call to the mind and emotions, it is a call to the body itself. A call to move, not with intensity, but with intention. The body, especially after sleep, holds onto the remnants of the previous day. Emotional impressions, stress responses, dreams, and even conversations that left you unsettled can remain stored in your posture, your breath, your joints. This accumulation isn't visible like dirt or dust, but it is felt. You might wake up with a tight chest, a heaviness in your back, or a subtle clenching in your jaw without fully realizing where it came from. But when you begin to move your body gently during this time, stretching, practicing Qigong, walking in stillness, you begin to release these invisible burdens. What you release physically is not separate from what you release emotionally. There was a woman in her 60s who had spent most of her adult life prioritizing others. Children, a husband, aging parents. Her schedule belonged to everyone except herself. But after they all left or moved on, she was alone. That's when the early awakenings began. At first, she thought it was hormonal. Then she believed it was just age. But in truth, it was something deeper. Her body had become accustomed to carrying weight it no longer needed to hold. The emotional roles she had played were now gone, but her body didn't know how to let them go. She began, quite simply, to stretch. 10 minutes every morning. Slow, conscious stretches. She would raise her arms above her head, circle her shoulders, roll her neck, and do gentle spinal twists. With each movement, she breathed out, almost as if sighing out years of emotional labor. Over time, those 10 minutes became sacred. Her body began to soften. Her sleep began to improve. But more importantly, she started to relate differently, with more presence, more authenticity. Movement was not just about health, it was about freedom. This is the power of gentle morning movement. It doesn't force anything, it invites, it allows. It reminds you that your body is not just a tool for productivity, it is a home for your spirit. And when you move that home with grace, with breath, with reverence, you begin to feel alive in a way that no cup of coffee can replicate. This principle is even more important in relationships. When your body is tense, your communication becomes tense. When your shoulders are tight, your words often come out rigid. When your breath is shallow, your patience is short. But when you begin your day with movement that releases this tension, you carry into your relationships a different energy, one that is spacious, grounded, and safe. People can feel it, even if they don't have the language to name it. A partner feels more comfortable around someone who breathes slowly, moves with intention, and makes eye contact with presence. Children feel safer around parents whose bodies are open and calm. Even difficult conversations become more manageable when the body isn't fighting itself. There's a man who used to wake up with such tightness in his chest that he often mistook it for a heart problem. Doctors found nothing wrong, but his body told a different story. He was holding years of suppressed resentment toward his father, whom he never confronted. Each morning, his body remembered the unsaid words, the withheld anger, the unmet need for approval. When he began incorporating a simple Qigong routine, just 15 minutes of slow movement and breath, something began to shift. The tightness didn't vanish overnight, but it no longer ruled him. He started speaking more openly with his partner, stopped avoiding hard conversations, and eventually wrote a letter to his father, not to send, but to say the words his body needed to release. Emotional stagnation is not just a mental issue, it's a physiological reality. What the mind resists, the body stores, And what the body stores eventually leaks into how you live, how you love, how you listen. That is why early morning movement is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Especially if you want to live with clarity, courage, and compassion. You do not need an hour. You do not need a complex routine. You only need your breath, your body, and your willingness to begin. Roll your shoulders. Twist your spine gently. Breathe into your hips. Walk barefoot if you can. Each movement is a declaration. I am here. I am listening. I am willing to feel. These moments will shape the emotional foundation of your day, because the way you move your body is the way you begin to move your emotions. If you move with grace, your words carry grace. If you move with softness, your boundaries become firm, but not harsh. If you move with awareness, your relationships become more conscious. The energy you begin with is the energy you carry. And the energy you carry is what others feel, even if they never say a word. This brings us to something deeper. Once your body is engaged, once your system is clear, there's a truth that emerges. Your emotional state in the early hours is not just personal, it is relational. It affects how you interact, how you love, how you forgive, and how you protect your energy. Modern neuroscience confirms what spiritual teachers have always known. The emotional tone you set within the first few hours of waking wires your brain's neurochemistry for the rest of the day. The amygdala, responsible for processing fear and threat, becomes more sensitive when your morning begins in stress. The prefrontal cortex, which governs empathy, focus, and decision-making, becomes more accessible when you begin your day in calm awareness. This is not abstract. It is deeply practical. Imagine waking up and immediately reaching for your phone, scrolling through news, social media, messages. Your mind is flooded before your breath is even steady. You enter a state of reactivity, and every interaction that follows is filtered through that lens. Now imagine something different. You wake, you breathe, you stretch, you move with care, you sit with silence. Maybe you write down one clear intention for how you want to show up. Not in what you'll do, but in who you'll be. This simple act rewires your brain. You begin to create a space inside you where reaction no longer rules. From that space, you can choose your words. You can regulate your emotions. You can speak with clarity instead of defense. A mother who begins her day in centered awareness responds to her child's tantrum, not with shouting, but with presence. A husband who begins his morning grounded and still walks into conflict with his wife, not with walls, but with openness. A woman navigating heartbreak starts her day not with anxiety, but with inner anchoring, and she finds that her self-worth is not dependent on whether someone stays or leaves. Your morning emotional state is a mirror. It shows you what you have cultivated in your inner world. And the good news is that it can be shaped not by changing circumstances, but by changing rituals. Not by adding more, but by being more intentional with less. One woman in her late 40s, struggling with the collapse of a long-term relationship, began to write a single sentence every morning after waking. Not about what happened, not about blame, just a sentence that described how she wanted to feel. At first, it felt silly, but over time, she noticed something profound. That sentence became a seed. It shifted her posture. It changed the way she walked into conversations. And eventually, it helped her forgive. Not because the other person changed, but because, as she had, your nervous system, your body, your breath, your emotions, they are not separate parts. They are a symphony, and the early morning hours are your chance to conduct them with intention. When you do, the music of your life changes. The way people experience you changes, and the way you experience love, connection, and intimacy deepens. There is nothing complicated about this. It does not require you to wake up at 4 a.m. every day for the rest of your life. It simply invites you to pay attention, to move when the body asks, to listen when the heart whispers, to choose presence over distraction. And when that becomes your practice, not once, but consistently, you begin to carry a different energy into your relationships. Not because you have all the answers, but because you are willing to be with yourself in the places most people avoid. That willingness becomes your strength. Your presence becomes a healing force. This is not about perfection, it's about practice. It's about noticing that how you treat your own emotional world in the first hours of the morning echoes into every interaction, every conversation, every connection throughout your day. And when your morning is rooted in clarity, movement, stillness, and truth, the rest of your day becomes an extension of that inner integrity. People around you may not know what you did at 4:30 a.m. They may not see the breath work, the journaling, the stretching, the tears you let fall. But they will feel the results. They will feel the way you look them in the eye. They will sense your groundedness. They will trust you more. And you will trust yourself more because you've learned not just how to wake up, but how to stay awake. Not just to the world, but to the truth of who you are. So when you find yourself waking between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., understand, it is not a mistake. It is a quiet invitation to return to yourself. Your body, your emotions, your energy are trying to guide you, not away from rest, but toward awareness. In those silent hours, you are offered a rare space where the mind is soft, the heart is open, and the soul is ready to speak. If you choose to respond, even gently, even with a single breath or a moment of stillness, you begin to rewrite the story you tell yourself each day. You begin to meet your life not with exhaustion, but with clarity, not with resistance, but with reverence. And in doing so, you carry into your relationships a presence that cannot be faked, a calm that cannot be shaken, and a love that begins with how deeply you choose to honor yourself. Let the early morning awakenings be your practice. Let them be the moment you remember who you are before the world asks you to be anything else. Because how you meet yourself in the dark is how you will lead yourself in the light.